Welcome back to the Torque Test channel and to our Force Science series. Yes, we're finally doing torque sticks, ladies and gentlemen. 3 different sources ranging in price, slightly dimensionally as well, but all the same purpose. What is that purpose? To limit torque from your impact gun, usually for the sake of quickly installing wheel lug nuts. Essentially on this end you might have 1,000 foot-pounds worth of impact wrench, but on this end you have a lug nut that you shouldn't be tightening much over, let's say 100 foot-pounds. So you use a 100 foot-pound torque stick to bring it into that ballpark without damaging anything with full beans, to put the vehicle back on the ground, then finish with a torque wrench. These only work with impact wrenches. Linear increasing torque, like when applied with a torque wrench, won't utilize this limiting design in any capacity. And why is that? Well, these range in torque ratings via small to big diameters on the length of the extension, which act as a torsion bar. Impact blows are delivered less and less efficiently down the extension length, the smaller the extension is. In simple terms, imagine a person is hanging from a rope. If you turn that rope gradually with your own hands like you would be with a wrench, that person will start to spin at the end. But if you have a plate sort of like attached to the side of that rope and you hit it with a hammer to try to turn that rope, it would sort of just spring back at you in between blows and not really do much. But do these extensions do a good job of that? Do ones bought from Harbor Freight versus Amazon versus the Snap-on tool truck make a difference? Are old ones worn out and therefore not useful anymore? If they work, does using cordless impacts or guns with different impacts per minute ruin that prospect? And basically over 24 separate quick tests to try and answer every one of your questions that we've seen down in the comments so far. One of the reasons this took us so long is we wanted to shoot these with a high-speed camera to see if one side of the extension really does move while the other doesn't after a certain level of torque. But ultimately we couldn't swing $4 to $6 grand for a Kronos or similar. Let us know if you're in SoCal and have one, or have one for sale and want to work out something. Alright, so in rare fashion with our dyno set up with the nut side out, like your lug nut would be on a car, and now freshly calibrated to a torque wrench for a change. This thing always surprises us how closely it can match a torque wrench when desired. Let's start throwing some ugga-duggas at these torque sticks. Most instructions mention you impact for a second or two, basically until you see the socket's progress slowed. So in many of our tests, that's what you'll see us doing, but stay tuned for lots of different runs and impacts. We do all sorts of things coming up. Up first is the 80 foot-pound stick from the $60 Harbor Freight set using an old school Ingersoll Rand gun that these types of tools are rumored to be calibrated for. So let's see that. So 72 foot-pounds so far. $82 now with same impacting time. And 77. So here's Astro now, 80 foot-pound torque stick. That's from a $89 set. $75. And $82. Here's Snap-on, a new 80 foot-pound stick that costs as much as $52 a piece, and their 5-piece set is $265, so about $530 as a comparable 10-piece set. $85, $81, and $79. Now here's an old one with about 3 years of occasional shop use. $78. And $88. So no real change between new and used so far. They seem to be limiting torque and even putting that torque in an expected range. But also so far on the best gun for this sort of thing, as rumor has it. So here's a cordless impact in the form of an M18 Mid-Torque. Harbor Freight is 82. Astro 71. And 78. Snap-on 82, and 76. Now for a much bigger gun, the most powerful air gun we've tested thus far, the Thor. Let's see that. So after a full second, closer to 100 than 80, let's dial it back to setting 2 out of 3, which instructions from multiple brands also recommend playing with. So 81 to 84 now, sort of what we want to see. And we get the same from Astro and Snap-on as well. But let's face it, not everyone's going to have a precise or consistent trigger finger, or heck, even care to pay attention to that socket progress to dial in that trigger time. So here's what the dyno graph of a 5 whole second unadulterated impacting time looks like now versus that 80 foot-pound target. $131, so if you fell asleep on the gun, it still might not be ruining a lug stud, but still not great. Here's the Harbor Freight. $131 foot-pounds again, about the same. And here's the Astro. $105 now, and that did seem to consistently put out that low number. We tried it a few times. Now for the Milwaukee Mid-Torque with 5-second runs. That's 121, so somehow similar results from a gun much less powerful than the Thor in their respective settings. And Harbor Freight's the same story. And the Astro sort of as well. So let's try a 150 foot-pound stick from the Harbor Freight, the highest sort of passenger vehicle common lug nut specification. So 149 to 161 foot-pounds in about 1.5 seconds. Remember, that's more than any gun made in 5 seconds with the 80 foot-pound stick. Here's the Astro 150 foot-pound stick. Looks like 135 to 140 due to being a little less trigger time. So now that we've sort of just winged it and eyeballed enough runs on these sticks, we're going to get into the method brands recommend doing for this to dial these things in. But in order to save you from an additional 15 to 20 or so brand tests that you don't need to watch, we can so far summarize some findings. Finding number 1, brands don't seem to matter a whole lot. Yes, we saw some difference on longer Ugga Duggas, but for the most part, as long as you recognize what brand you're buying and you understand a warranty difference, these tools seem to be playing with the same set of rules, so go out and save a buck if you can. Our second finding was that we still haven't determined if they are accurate, but they do seem to be somewhat consistent. If your goal is to not destroy yours or your customer's wheel stud or aluminum wheel, these do seem to limit torque in a predictable manner. Number 3, higher rated sticks do transfer more torque. In this test, it took maybe 0.3 to 0.4 seconds more time in our testing to see that socket slow down, but during that half a second, the 150 foot-pound stick gained more torque than the 80 foot-pound saw in a whole 5 seconds. And for number 4, do they work on cordless? That's yet to be seen. More testing is needed. To help answer that, we're going to use the recommended process for those of you without a dyno like us, the marking method. We're going to use a 100 foot-pound torque stick and torque this nut to 100 foot-pounds, then make some marks on the nut and the area around the nut, which in your case would probably be a wheel. Then use the Thor gun first. We'll impact on this thing the amount we normally would and see if the lines sort of match up, indicating a good match at the end. In this case, they do, and you can turn the gauge on to see where we're at, which is 94, 95 foot-pounds. Not bad. Here's that again. Again, about the same amount of impact time we've been doing so far. The lines line up, and 103 foot-pounds. So let's see it with the Milwaukee. Now, the Milwaukee we noticed after practicing needs less trigger time to hit this mark, but the Milwaukee makes less power. What's going on? To figure that out, we really need to do a baseline test on these tools, something we've ignored up until now. How much are these making less their extensions? Here's the Thor, no extension, just on that socket, same trigger time. 214 foot-pounds. Now for the Milwaukee. So the Milwaukee is already pretty close to the ranges we've been testing without a torque stick, which means the extension is not really being asked to do a whole lot. And yet with less trigger time, it's making the same beans. What gives? Time to settle this cordless question with a real high torque, the Matco 20 volt, which is quite a bit more powerful than the Thor in this forward direction. Here's this baseline run, trying to keep it short like we needed to do with the M18 and its line matching runs. Now here it is with that 100 foot-pound torque stick. Yeah, so lines don't match. It's 33% over its target, and it was an even shorter trigger pull. But we saw this time and time again, so time to try these out on some actual lug nuts and lug studs. 100 foot-pound and 150 foot-pound rated ones. First with the Thor on the 100. Those lines seem to line up. Remember, this is an imperfect science. We're sort of just doing what you might. Fun fact, a 100 foot-pound stick may not remove a 150 foot-pound lug nut, which sort of makes sense. So let's throw that 150 stick on now. And here's the Matco cordless. Apologize for this camera angle. The other camera's battery died. So yeah, the reason you can't see the mark is it's at 3 o'clock. Torque sticks just do not like high torques. We tried a rigid and a DeWalt on the same process and had similar results. What about swapping in a shallow socket though? Can switching up the mass on the end change things? So on the whole, we found this to slightly increase torque transfer, contrary to our understanding. Now let's see what the dyno curve of just ripping a 80 foot-pound stick for 10 seconds on a high torque looks like. $253, yeah, a lot more than 80. Now for the Thor highest setting, same thing. $219 with a slower curve as well, sort of more margin for error in those first few seconds on an air tool. Alright, last test. We found on episodes past that regular old impact extensions also plateau quite a bit, themselves acting like torque limiting extensions. And the longer the extension, the more dramatic that loss. So can we just use an even longer extension to sort of do the same thing? Here's a 10-inch impact extension, 2 inches longer than these torque sticks so far. So it does limit torque, but at least from our tests, less consistently so. And if you wanted an 80 or 100 foot-pound extension equivalent, that'd be over a foot, 14 inches long. So here's this dyno curve versus the torque sticks from both guns. .308 foot-pounds and quite a steep curve. Not much margin for error there in snapping off a lug stud. So what have we learned? How would we summarize our findings? I know we probably left out something you wanted to see, which we can include if we ever get our hands on a high-speed camera and do another episode, but overall, do torque limiting extensions work? Well, not if you have a cordless impact, in our opinion. We've tried various impacts we've gotten our hands on since shooting this footage, and the consistency is all over the place. With air impacts, do they work? Well, yes, they limit torque. They prevent you from damaging stuff for the most part. Are they accurate? Well, that depends on how all out you're willing to go with line matching tests to dial in your specific impact, its settings, and socket weight. Perhaps even use a different torque stick rating depending on what those settings are. But overall, I have to say no. Accuracy is hitting a specific mark, right? Precision is hitting something consistently. I wouldn't say any given stick will hit a specific mark, but they are within a window of preciseness that should allow you to do what you're supposed to be doing. I mean, you're not zipping wheels on with these things and driving the car off the lot, right? Right? I mean, if you are, I hope this video hasn't given you even more ammo to ignore the necessity of using a torque wrench, the thing that really at the end of the day should be used regardless of how you put a wheel on or how fast you do it. We appreciate you joining us for this For Science episode. Suggest more down in the comments, and thanks as always for watching.